Good evening, and we'll wait a few minutes as people are signing in. And we're going to put a few resources in the chat. There is an interesting video for some. And of course, there's our marvelous garland of rare gems too. And one of our other reference books. So do take a look when you have a moment. And I think it is just a moment. And so we will begin so that we can begin in a timely manner. So I want to welcome you to our evening, and we have been looking at, examining, hearing about the biographies of masters of awareness in the Dzogchen tradition. And we are working with a marvelous garland of rare gems, which is this very, very huge book full of amazing stories. And it relates to the Longqing Ningtig tradition and the lineage holders. And some of us have either done or are doing the Longqing Ningtig Ningzhou and other practices. So these masters are directly connected. So this evening, we are going to have a look at the master Vimalamitra. And when we do our lineage prayer for the Longqing Ningtig Ningzhou, it is just stated as Vima. So we began with, in our teachings and learning, and we are calling this a fireside chat because it's not a book group, it's not an academic study, it's not a meditation, it's a fireside chat. So together we're going to be learning and are learning about these masters who have brought the teachings that many of us are now doing or may do in the future. So as we recall, we began with Longchen Ramjampa, also known as Longchenpa, Longchen Ramjampa Drime Ozer. And we had one whole evening on him. And we can look onto the Samden Ling YouTube, and there are recordings of each of these. Then that was chapter 5. And then we went to chapter 2, and that was the transmission of symbols. And there we talked about Garab Dorje, Manjushra Mitra, Śrī Siṃha, Vimalamitra, and Jñānasūtra. And we also talked about the places where the Dzogchen teachings were emerging, coming from, and being transmitted from. We talked about the Swat Valley in Pakistan, India, Nepal, and China. And now for this evening, we're going to have a clear path to Tibet. And Again, this will be on the Samden Ling YouTube channel for those who want to catch up. So Vimalamitra is going to be chapter 4. And chapter 4 is a little bit long, so we'll probably be breaking it up. And Vimalamitra has a long lineage. And this evening, we're not going to get to Kumaradza, who was Longchen Rabjam's teacher, but it's all within the lineage from Vimalamitra, again, which is chapter 4. So we begin with, we're now in India, Kapila, India, and there's a king, and his name is King Indrabodhi, and he's called King Indrabodhi the Younger. And in researching a little bit, it turns out that either King Indrabodhi lived a very long time, or there were 3 incarnations of King Indrabodhi. At any rate, he was a very kind king, and he upheld Buddhist values, and he had a royal priest named Vimalamitra. And Vimalamitra was his royal priest for, I believe, it says 60 years. And of course, it says Vimalamitra lived for a very long time. And before Vimalamitra was the royal priest, he had trained, as you know, for many years under Śrī Siṃha. And then he passed away into a rainbow body. And we're going to start hearing about the teachers who pass away into rainbow bodies. And it's not easy to do, but he did it. And because he had mastery over his elements, he returned. And he returned to be the royal priest and to King Indrabhuti. So King Indrabhuti was considered an emanation of Maitreya, who's the coming Buddha. And he had a court of 500 scholars. And he had Vimalamitra as his royal priest because Vimalamitra was both very learned and spiritually accomplished. Simultaneously, in Tibet, there was King Traisan Detsen. And some of us who've heard a little bit about the Tibetan lineages and Tibet itself, beginning with Padmasambhava coming to Tibet with the invitation of King Traisan Detsen. And he was in an area called Samye, and that is near Chimpuk. And we've also mentioned Chimpuk as a place that Padmasambhava practiced, Longchen Rabjam practiced. And Chimpuk is where I met Azam Pelo Rinpoche. So Samye is at the foot of Chimpuk. And King Traisan Detsen in Tibet was considered an emanation of Manjushri, the deity of wisdom. And we talked about that mantra, Omara Patsana Didi Didi Di, that young school children say before tests. And that's so they can have that enlightened wisdom of Manjushri. And so with King Traisan Detsen in Tibet, he had a monastery that he was building. So this was the beginning of Samye, which was the first monastery of Tibet. That building began in 763 and was completed in 779. It's in the Yarlung Valley and a little bit south of Lhasa, and it's right along the Yarlung Sangpo River. So he was building Samye, and he had also a royal priest. And that royal priest, his name was Tenzin Zangpo of Nayang. And he was very, very learned and very practiced. It's said that he went on retreat for 7 years and 7 months, and he had the power to see all 4 continents at once, and he was visionary. And it's said that he purified his vision. And during those 7 years, he remained in a state of calm abiding. So King Traisan was advised by Tenzin Zagpo, his royal priest, to bring in a learned master who could teach result-oriented approach of secret mantra. And he had heard that in India, there was Vimalamitra. And so he said to King Traisan, I think you should bring in a learned scholar. He didn't say it was Vimalamitra, but he said to send 2 of Tibet's very best translators and learned scholars to India to request that a scholar be brought to Tibet and that the teachings would flourish. So it was really the royal priest who advised King Traisan to make that invitation. And as soon as King Traisan heard the idea, he said, let it be done. So he sent 2 translators who were very well regarded, and he had a ceremony for them. And he said something very beautiful to them that I want to read you on page 79. And he said, you 2 sons of good family who have acquired power through your miraculous command of language, so that the utterly profound teachings of the result-oriented secret mantra approach may spread in our realm of Tibet. It is my wish that you go to the city of Kapila in India, where there dwells a king named Indrabhuti, who has 500 scholars at his court. And in his royal presence, offer 7 plaques with designs worked in gold and 9 measures of powdered gold. I command that, and having made these offerings, you relate humbly to His Majesty King Indrabhuti. These are gifts from the King of Tibet. In return, he asks that you send with both of you highly trained scholar who is especially learned in the result-oriented secret mantra approach. And now go. So he sends his 2 scholars on a very hard journey to Tibet and to present these beautiful gifts. And while King Traisan is making the requests of the 2 scholars, he himself wears a ceremonial hat. And one of the scholars' name is Kawa Paltsek, and the other one is Chokro Louis Gyaltsen. And they are learned and they are of fine intelligence, and they will eventually become 2 of the disciples of the 25 disciples of Padmasambhava. And they are going to be vital to bringing in the Vinaya, the precepts, the monks' precepts, and to establish this form of Buddhism in Tibet. Now, obviously, Buddhism had been coming in different ways, but these are direct transmissions connected to the Dzogchen tradition. And the other teacher was Kawa Palsek. Again, he was going to be the translator for the Tripitaka, and he was also going to be an ordained monk. He was clairvoyant, and he was also the translator of a famous text called the Bodhicharyavatara. So here we have both two learned scholars who are also translators who are going on this pilgrimage to get another translator. And again, what we're starting to see here is that the teachings are moving from India to Tibet. It cannot be done without great scholarship and also with translators' abilities to be accurate and to bring it in directly. So when the translators got to Indrabhuti's place in Kapila, India, and they presented him all of the beautiful offerings, which is very traditional. It's very traditional to make an offering with a request, just go and ask, but to make beautiful offerings. And so he brought all of his scholars together, and at that point, King Indrabhuti didn't know which scholar would be sent to Tibet, and he posed to his court of 500 scholars that there was this request. And so all of the scholars felt that Vimalamitra should be the one that carried the text, that carried the tradition, that carried the teachings from India to Tibet. So it's said that when he heard that he was going to be selected, he made this sound, and the translators really couldn't figure out what it was, but both of them came up with a translation that if the arrow was shot, it would be successful, so that if he went, that this would be a successful journey. So Vimalamitra was chosen, and then he brought another master as his attendant for the journey. And it's said that he took all of the secret Ningtig, and we know that word Ningtig, Longqing Ningtig, and there's other Ningtigs, Kanjo Ningtig. So he took all of the secret Ningtig teachings with his attendant, whose name was Shitagarbha, and he went off to Tibet. Now, did it happen easily? Well, not exactly. So the king in Djibouti did not tell everyone that he was sending Vimalamitra to Tibet, but many people had dreams. And their dreams was that they were losing their texts and they were losing their scholar and they would be bereft. So then they went to the king, and the king said yes, he had sent Vimalamitra with all of the text to Tibet. So the Indian people were upset. And what did they do? They sent swift runners. And we've talked about swift runners before. As you'll recall, Śrī Siṃha learned how to become a swift runner when he went from China, from Wu Taishan to the Charnel grounds of India to learn. So here we have swift runners who are going to go to some known paths that go to Tibet, and they decided that they're going to spread rumors. And the rumors that they were spreading along the path was that there was somebody who was going to be taking demonic mantras to Tibet, and this was very bad, and they were trying to stop him. Well, Vimalamitra got to Tibet, and he met King Traisan Detsu, And the translators were there introducing Vimalamitra to King Traisan, and King Traisan wanted him first to rest in a place called Butsal Hall. In the meantime, some malicious ministers in Tibet heard about what they called the borderlands. And of course, that's where you cross the border from India and Tibet. And that there was these evil mantras coming in that would destroy the land. So they presented that to King Traisan, and they said, "Oh, you've brought in the wrong person. This is an awful person." And of course, the translators who didn't know anything about this were devastated because they said, "Oh, we've made this hard journey, and the best person was chosen, and the texts are here." And the king at first just would not give him an audience. And so Vimalamitra said, he was going to stay in his room in the Butsa Hall, and he prayed to Vairocana, and all of the sudden, all of the statues in the hall broke and they crashed and they went into bits and pieces. And so then King Traisan said, "Oh, yes, the mistake has really been made because he just destroyed all of my Buddha images." So 3 days later, Vimalamitra prays again to Vairocana, and then all of the statues are put back to their original form, except more beautiful and made in very beautiful Indian image, and also much shinier and more glorious than they were before. And so then King Traisan said, "Oh no, the right person has come." And then he sent swift runners. And again, for those of you who maybe missed part of chapter 2, a swift runner is actually a concentration technique that the Native Americans had as well, where they could go many miles. And in the Tibetan form, it said that their feet were about a foot off the ground. So they could go very quickly through space and arrive at their destination very quickly. So King Traisan sent out swift runners and had plans for a ceremony which was to take place in a month. And so I guess that's how long it took for swift runners to get everyone gathered. And so after a month, there was a very large, very beautiful 2 platform thrones set up at Samye. And again, we're at the first monastery of Tibet. And the text points out also that we're now 1,080 years after the passing of the Buddha, just to put that into some context. And then Vimalamitra actually became the advisor to King Traisan. And then I want to read what the thrones looked like. So one moment. So on that morning, a month later, an impressive high throne inlaid with turquoise was erected on the right for the king. And similarly, a high throne covered in gold leaf was built to the left, and that was for Vimalamitra. And all of the Tibetans congregated, and the king paid homage to the scholar Vimalamitra. And on the king's shirt of fine silk, at the level of his heart, appeared the deities known as the lords of the 3 families. These were brilliant and clearly present for all. Vimalamitra snapped his fingers over the jeweled crown on the king's head and said, "Om Ahum." And the Buddhas of the 5 families appeared brilliantly and apparent to everyone. And with this, the people of Tibet praised Vimalamitra. So Vimalamitra is now bringing in the teachings of the Nyingtig. And then he is teaching the people of Tibet, and then he's giving special teachings to 5 people in the evening in one of the meditation halls. And the 5 people were King Traisan and the 2 translators, Nying Tenzin Zangpo and Choki Ludru Gyaltsen, and also the Prince Mune Tsepo, and Kawa Pasek. Now, who was Kawa Pasek? On the throne, when Vimalamitra had gotten off of his throne, he came back and he saw a note. And the note said something very profound. And Vimalamitra wanted to know, well, who wrote that note? And it turns out that there was a beggar, but the beggar was actually a scholar, and he had learned from another teacher who we will mention later called Bhairatsana. And so he had already studied a number of the texts and had done some, maybe some translation himself. And so Vimalamitra included him in that teaching. It is said that when Vimalamitra taught the 5 and then he passed on all of that, he then, as you know, dissolved into light. And then he went off to Wu Taishan, which we've mentioned before, the 5-peak mountain in China. So he went to China. And he then gave all of his teachings to the 2 translators, and the first one being Nying Tenzin Zampo. And now we're talking about the 8th and 9th century. And so he gave to him, one of the people who made that hard journey to bring Vimalamitra back, and he gave him the complete tantras, explanatory commentaries, the pith instructions, and the sublime secret teachings of Vimalamitra. He studied for 55 years, and he practiced exactly as he had been instructed. And also he employed the guardian Vajrasadhu. And this is where we come to find out about a temple called Zahi Longpo. And Zahi Longpo is, it was destroyed a few times, and there have been a rebuilding and then again another rebuilding. But the first person to build Zahi Lakang was Nying Tenzin Zangpo, who's the direct disciple of Vimalamitra, who was the translator who went to find him in the first place. And so to finance Zahi Longpo, it took a great deal. So he called upon the guardian Vajrasadhu, and I'm not quite sure how this happened, but the guardian created a hailstorm in eastern Tibet, which somehow brought 500 camels full of bales of barley. And these bales of barley were the way that the temple was financed. And also, and we've talked about guardians before and the taming of some of the guardians to guard the teachings, to guard the practices, and then also to guard the people and temples. And so Tenzin Zangpo had a 9-pronged vajra that he threw up into the air, and he reminded the guardian Vajrasadhu to protect Zahi Lakang. So that's how that temple came in being, is because of the 5 camels with bales of, I'm sorry, 500 camels with bales of barley that then did the financing for that practice of that temple, which housed the practices of all of the Nyingtic teachings. So the reason we hear of Sai Lakang is that all of the Nyingtic teachings were housed there. So then that was erected, and the Nyingtic and the explanatory tantras, and they were all put into and concealed. And we've mentioned this before, that many times the teachings are concealed for later times, or sometimes there is not someone to pass them on to, but they want to preserve them. So they concealed them within cycles, within layers and crypts in Sri Lakang, and there were urns of scrolls and manuscripts and oral lineages concealed, and also something called the Golden Heart Essence. So the intensely illuminating sun text, which was unsurpassable, and they were made invisible with a seal. So the Nyingtig practices which Vimalamitra brought, they had been recorded and annotated, and the text of the oral lineage was then entrusted to Lodro Wangchuk of the Bay clan to ensure that the transmission of the lineage continued. And of course, everyone passes away into masses of light, and the texts were actually hidden in the Drakta cave, also near Lhasa. And then Bei Lodro Wangchuk, who was in the 9th century, and then I'm going to read a little bit about him. And their biography sounds similar, but what's happening are some phrasing. So for example, Lodro Wangchuk, he then studied all of the pith instructions, all of the oral lineages of the secret Nyingtig, the Dzogchen approach to utter lucidity, and he received the complete transmission with nothing omitted. And this phrase is used a lot, like one vase being filled with another. So that is the kind of transmission from one teacher to the other. So from the translator Nying Tenzin Zangpo to Bei Lodro Wangchuk, it's called like pouring from a vase from one to the other. And again, nothing omitted. So then again, he dissolves into a mass of light. And although there is a short chapter on Bei Lodro Wangchuk, he is referred to in Longchenpa's writings. And again, when we're reading this, a lot of times Longchenpa is referred to as the omniscient one. So the omniscient one, Longchenpa, refers to him in a verse. I pray to the teacher of the Bei clan, Lodro Wangchuk, and also Adzam Drukpa, and now we're getting a little bit closer with our lineage, spoke of him as the venerable Lodro Wangchuk, who attained the body of light. And it was from this holy guru that Drome Rinchen Bar heard the teachings. And so now they are being transmitted to yet one more teacher. And again, the Nyingtig teachings, the Dzogchen approach of utter lucidity, and Dram Rinchen Bar was granted uninterrupted. And again, these phrasings of uninterrupted, without omission, from vase to vase means there's complete transmission that is taking place. And it's important for us because these are the teachings that are coming to us. And they're coming in very clear ways, they're coming in very educated ways, and they're coming in very practiced ways. So that's why, although these teachers have short chapters, they're profound because it's one vase going into the other, and they're all dissolving into light. So something must be right. So he had the authentic pith instructions from both India and Tibet with nothing left out, like one vase being filled from another. And he pursued practice of the ultimate heart essence. And again, we're getting into some phrasing, heart essence of the vast expanse. So now we're hearing about the heart essence of the holy ones. And then these got stored as in Drakar Tasso, and also in holy sites and mountains and lakes and cliffs of Western Tibet. Now, Western Tibet, again, is towards Pakistan, and there have been ruins found in Western Tibet. So he attains sublime city and the secret path of natural great perfection. Again, another word for Dzogchen, the natural great perfection. And he passed his instructions on to Dangma Lundrup Gyaltsen in one-to-one transmission. And this is very important because a lot of the Dzogchen teachings and transmissions are one-to-one. So, for example, Vimalamitra taught 5 people, and then Dram Rinchen taught Dagma Lundrup Gyaltsen 1-to-1. So this is one person receiving that. And then it said at a certain point, his enlightened intent resolved into the primordial expanse of inner basic space. Again, these are all Dzogchen terminology. And it is this master to whom the great omniscient one, again, Longchen Rabjam, refers to, I pray to the teacher of the Drome clan, Rinchen Bar, in the wilderness of Drakar Tasso. So here again, we have Longchenpa's lineage praying to his lineage. And this is within the book, A Marvelous Garland of Rare Gems. So it's starting to come together where one vase is going into another and the teachings are getting handed down. And that was in the 9th to the 10th centuries. And then we have the 10th to the 11th century. So we're moving right along. And then there was Dagma Lundrup Gyaltsen, who came 100 years after Nying Tenzin Dzogchen, and that was the translator. So we've talked about a 100-year span. And then that teacher, he received a prophecy from the deity Vajrasadhu, and he was shown to reveal the manuscripts which were hidden in Zari-Lakang. Remember, Zari-Lakang is where the Ningtig manuscripts were all hidden in central Tibet for the right person to reveal. And he also received from Rinchen Bar the complete transmission of the oral lineage, the uninterrupted, and there's that word uninterrupted, lines of pith instruction from India and Tibet that concern the secret Ningtig teachings. And here we have Ningtig being referred to quite a bit. And the Dzogchen approach of utter lucidity, again, Dzogchen terminology and practices, And not content to remain at the level of intellectual speculation, he pursued the spiritual practice to the true nature of phenomenon. And since he discovered the cachet of termas, then he spent 15 years searching for somebody suitable. And this proved to be Chetsun Senge Wangchuk. And he passed this on to him. And then Dogma passed away, and of course into rainbow light. And then after his passing, there were marvelous remains and relics. And it was from this master that Chetsun heard the teachings. So we're going to stop at Chetsun Senge Wangchuk. Maybe, let's see if we're going to do that. I think we'll finish with Chetsun Senge Wangchuk, because then we're going to get to the longer part of this chapter, and then we're going to get to Kumaradza, who's the teacher of Longchen Rabjam. So Chetsun Senge Wangchuk was between the 11th and 12th centuries. Again, we're getting to closer into our time. And this is important. Chetsun copied the manuscripts that had been hidden as termas. So now we have, again, that's already copied. And then he also received all the spiritual instructions. And then when Chetsun wrote out the terma text, he concealed the original manuscripts. And then he had met a mendicant yogi, and he said to him that I am the learned Vimalamitra. Vimalamitra appeared to him, and the fortunate one, if you wish to extract the innermost heart essence in the essence of Gekong in a cliff and Drakmar in Chimpuk, are the secret Nyingtig teachings, which are truly like one's heart. And take these texts, meditate for 7 years in isolation, and then your physical form will cease to be visible. So he became invisible. And having heard these words, he went to Chimpuk. Again, many have meditated there, where he met a woman with straight, even teeth that were like conch shells, eyebrows of turquoise, who revealed manuscripts to him. And then he took these to another person named Zaye Rawa. And there, Vimalamitra appeared to him and stayed for 2 weeks and gave him the direct transmission, empowerments, and teachings. And then Vimalamitra went back to the 5-peaked mountain in China. And we actually hear these stories where the deity themselves, Vimalamitra himself, appearing, giving transmission, and then returning to where he came from. So Chetsun meditated for 7 years. He did leave no physical remains. And then he met his next disciple, Tokugawa Zangton. And then at the age of 125, Chetsun passed away. So then we go to the next person who we're going to stop, because there's quite a bit about him. But I wanted to, I know these are a lot of names, but I'm somebody who likes to say their name, because as we have learned in our saying of the lineage, for those people doing Longchen Nyingtig Nunjo, or anybody doing Longchen Nyingtig practices, sometimes we don't know who these people are. We've never heard their name. We don't know how they relate. We don't know how they connect. How did they learn? Who did they learn it from? And it's very traditional. It used to be that a lot of early teachings I went to, the teacher, and the Dalai Lama used to do this, would say exactly who they learned the teachings from and who that teacher learned it from. And a lot of the texts are also of where these texts originated, who gave them. And again, this is really the holding, the keeping of the integrity of the whole lineage. So although these, because we're in a process of switching cultures and of learning about other cultures and how Buddhism was transmitted and how it's being transmitted to us, it's important to know how the teachings were held, the integrity of which they were held, that they would be hidden so that really the most competent people or person could be the receiver and the transmitter of the teaching. And the fact that there were extraordinary translators to bring these teachings from India to Tibet. And of course, we are talking about other languages as well, coming from Pakistan, coming from India, coming from China. So every step of the way were transmissions, teachings, translators, extraordinary translators who'd done an amazing amount of practice to be able to bring this. And the same thing is happening for us, is that there are very well-trained translators. There are groups of translators who are bringing these texts to us. So the translator for A Marvelous Garland of Rare Gems is Richard Barron, who is a Westerner whose Tibetan spiritual name is Chokinima. And he began very early, and he's incredibly well trained, and he's part of another translation group. So we are the benefactors, really, of these transmissions, traditions, pouring of one vase into another. And so hopefully this is helping for us to appreciate, and also um, the climbing of mountains, the walking from India to Tibet. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like in the 700s. I know when I was in Tibet, just to walk from one place to the other, it was quite extreme. So going throughout the whole country with gifts and texts should be quite challenging. But all of that was done. And again, we're the recipients and so blessed for all of this activity. Okay. So we're at the end of more than the end of our 45 minutes, and then we turn off our recording at this time, and then we have some questions